welcome to Step Into a Story. I would tell you what episode we're on, but I have no clue. It might be 5 or 6. We have not done a whole lot of these, but I'm looking forward to doing some more. And so today we welcome Rebecca May Hope. And go ahead and tell my vast audience something about yourself.
All right. Well, thanks for having me, Laura. Laura and I met a couple of different ways through writers group,
Yes.
and she was teaching my daughter harp
Mm-hmm.
first, and then we met later at writers group, and it took us a while to figure out the previous connection we'd had, but we did.
Feels so odd to me because usually I remember faces, and I think I had asked you, did you ever take music lessons, or did your daughter at Brooklyn
Yeah.
Park? And you had taken them at Maple Grove, so you said no, and I went, I think that's part of why I couldn't figure out where I knew you from.
Right, right. Well, yeah, so I have 5 surviving children, and I homeschooled them all. And I kind of, I'm a teacher at Northwestern College. I'm an English professor there, and I've taught, after homeschooling my children, I taught at a number of homeschool co-ops and academies, and then I ended up starting my own homeschool academy in 2020, in the pandemic year, with my oldest daughter. And so I run that, and then I got into writing kind of around 2016. 2017, it was after my divorce, and then that's where I met you, Laura.
Right.
But I was doing a lot of memoir writing at first, and short story writing, and then I got into the historical fiction. Actually, some of the first writing that I did was memoir writing, and was able to get published some short works and win some contests with that. Because God has led me on an interesting journey
Yes.
all through my life from childhood on up. And so I felt there were things that other people could benefit from my story. So I enjoyed that kind of writing.
Okay, so I was not aware that you only started writing as recently as 2016. You never wrote before that?
Well, I loved writing growing up, but I kind of persuaded myself that I wasn't a creative writer, that I
Mm-hmm.
was more of a business writer. And then I got into business, and I ran my husband's naturopathic business for 30 years. And so I did all kinds of business writing and patient communications and marketing kind of
Mm-hmm.
writing, a lot of that over the years. But I had kind of that inner love of creative writing, and of course literature, because I
Mm-hmm.
majored in literature, got my master's in that. So I always loved
Okay.
fiction, but just didn't think of myself as,
Right.
a creative writer. So
Right. Right.
then I was kind
So,
of reimagining myself after my divorce, and then that was part of it. It's like, what do I love? Well, I
huh?
love writing, and let's see what kind of writing I can do.
Yep, that's I mean, I've been writing my whole life, but some marriage issues were part of what pushed me back to writing, where I finally said I've been putting aside absolutely everything to try and save what I don't think can be saved. And so I need to get back to who I was. And now I am again, thank goodness. So what got you started with the historical novels? I do have one of yours here.
Hmm.
Yes, Destination Harmony. And what is the other one?
Silken
It's
Strands.
Silken Strands. I know it was 2
Right.
S's. And they're both about utopias. So this, I think, is my favorite one, if for no other reason. Then I love the boatload full of knowledge with the smartest people in the country getting themselves stuck in the ice
I
because it
know.
didn't occur to them rivers freeze in January. It might not be a good time to take a boat.
I know. You
So
just can't make
I
this stuff up.
exactly. Was it Mark Twain who said the difference between truth and fiction is that fiction has to make sense? And so if you made that up, people would go, nobody's that stupid, especially not the smartest people in the country.
Yeah,
And yet that's what
exactly.
happened.
Exactly what happened. in
What
1825.
1825, what got you started on the path of utopian societies, which both of these are about?
Well, it was my teaching. I was teaching a high school literature class, and we had a little section on utopian literature. And so then, in kind of getting used to that or getting into that, started reading about all these historic American utopias. And it's like, I had never heard of them,
Right,
was such a big part of American history. But it's like, as you go through and take history, there's so much that you miss in
right,
school.
right.
So I was very intrigued by this thought of why were there over 100 of these utopian
Wow.
communities that spring up all across the U.S. and why isn't it happening now? And so I was just very intrigued. And then I teach like 4 historical utopias in my class, and
Hmm.
the most intriguing were the Oneida community, which is in upstate New York, and that's what I wrote first about,
Hmm.
strands. And then the second one that I found intriguing was New Harmony, Indiana, which is the destination Harmony.
Okay. And so what were the years of these 100 utopias or attempts at utopia, and why aren't they happening today?
Well, if you know Coleridge, the poet, and William Wordsworth, they were in the very late, like 1795 period was when they came out with their lyrical ballads. So they started a new kind of poetry then. But right before that, Samuel Taylor Coleridge had almost gone to America to join one of these utopias. So it was happening in like 1790
Okay.
already. And he had, so there were like, I think 8 guys, and they were all going to go, and they had to have a wife. And so he like got married to a woman just to go on join this American utopia. And then it fell through, and here he had this wife.
Did he keep her?
Yes, for a while, but they were estranged and they never had a good marriage. So
Hmm.
there we go. That was a failed utopia, and he didn't even get there. But
Wow.
so it was the whole of the 1800s
Hmm.
into the early 90s, I guess, until it kind of petered out.
Okay. And do you have any idea what started this craze or what caused it to peter out?
Well, there was a guy named Fourier in France who was writing about socialist communities. It was the idea that if people could just work together,
Hmm.
then if you didn't have this competition, you could be so much more efficient, was the
Hmm.
concept. And so they were writing about how to create perfect societies. So Fourier was one of the leading thought philosophers on that line, and he was writing in the early 80s.
Okay.
But most of them that started were religiously motivated, and so they were
Right.
being persecuted in Europe for their beliefs, and so they felt led, of the Lord to come. So the most successful ones were religious ones, and New Harmony, which was the first attempt at a secular socialist experiment in the U.S. That was in 1825, and that one just flamed out. It didn't even last more
Very
than 18 months about.
right. I thought it was very quickly. And what about Oneida? Did they think of themselves as being religious?
Absolutely. They practiced Bible communism, was what they called
Hmm.
it. So they were highly religious, considered themselves Christian, even though
Which
they
is
had some
odd considering.
bizarre sexual practices where they practiced
How did
communal
they
marriage.
justify saying we're Christian, and yet, for those who don't know, which is probably the vast majority of Americans, they practiced group marriage. And so all the men were married to all the women, or should I say married. How did they reconcile in their mind that they were calling themselves Christian, but they were all sleeping with everybody, which
Yeah.
doesn't seem very Christian?
They had a very strong, in their mind, biblical reason for it. And they thought that communalism based on Acts, how the new believers held everything in common.
Hmm.
And so John Humphrey Noyes, who was their very charismatic leader, said that if we're going to be true communists, that's not just for our material property, but that's for our relationships as well. And he said, we have to treat everybody with the same level of love, which means that you will marry everybody. Yeah.
No.
But it really came about because he was enamored with one of the other members' wives.
And that was my question. I have no doubt we talked about this in Night Riders, but it's been a long time. My question was going to be, from your research, did he really believe this, or was it a good excuse to do what he wanted to do?
He was like most cult leaders, you know, he fits the characteristics of a cult leader, so probably had a very, very high opinion of himself, and that whatever he came up with, you know, he could justify as being enlightened, you know,
right.
From the Lord. But there was definitely what started it was his interest in a woman who was not his wife, and that was a way to get her.
Right, right. So you have branched out. I should mention Shattered Faith is another one of your books. And did you want to kind of briefly just mention what that's about? I have a copy, but it's in the basement, so.
Sure. Yeah, Shattered Faith, it's a novella, and it's just a nice little book. So I started it out as a short story that actually had a little bit of a relationship to something that had happened in my life, but then I imagined something else happening. So anyway, this woman, her daughter, 11-year-old daughter, keeps having these bizarre visions that can't be true. And the main character, Faith, is a mystery writer. And so she's trying to find out why her daughter's having these weird visions. But one of the visions is of a black cat with blue eyes, which can't happen. And then Faith, the wife, ends up investigating a little bit, but then as she goes home and she turns down her bed cover, she finds this long black hair on the pillow cover, and she's blonde, and so this says to her that her husband's been having an affair. So the short story I wrote left it there, and it did win acknowledgement and got published, but I just felt like, oh, I didn't want to leave Faith in that horrible place. And so I imagined the rest of this story and wrote it where she's got one weekend to find out if her husband really is having an affair and if that's what that long black hair on the bed meant. And so she goes through a journey, and it's set in the Twin Cities in the summer, and she goes around to different places and meets with different of her support system. You know, it's kind of how women support each other through tragic periods of their lives. She has some tragedy in her past with a stillborn child that she has never healed from. And so God kind of leads her on this journey, and it has a happy ending, and it has a good villain in it as well.
A good villain.
Who you love to hate.
One thing I really liked about Shattered Faith was that it's not good and bad, and that Faith, in a way, she has kind of been wronged, but she also had to face that she caused some of it. I don't want to say she's not innocent, but she has her own guilt in how she has treated her husband, that she has to realize how she was contributing to their problems. And yes, it does have a happy ending. But your newest release is, I should know this, Stolen by Schizophrenia. Do you have the book cover handy to show?
Let's see. Okay, is it going to be backwards now?
I don't know. It looks the right way to me.
All right. Yeah, Stolen by Schizophrenia is my most recent release through Gabriel's Horn Press.
And I believe, is it your first nonfiction? I think it is.
Yes, actually. Yes, book length.
And do you have a reading ready to go?
Oops. Okay. Let's see. Okay. I've got one that's a couple pages here.
Okay, go ahead.
Should I just start? Okay, so before this part, this happened when my sister and I were adults, and she was living at her home on the lake. I'd had, I think, a couple of, or maybe one child at that point, and I came over to her lake house just to visit. And she was showing me around the outside of her house and the flowers, and then this happens. Soon she directed me into the house to her design studio. In that pre-digital era, she assembled type, photos, and graphic elements on a slanted ruled table similar to a draftsman's bench. After she showed me some brochures she was laying out, she gave me a solemn look. "I know what's going to happen in the future," she said mysteriously. "I've seen it." I followed her to the family room, and we sat on the couch facing each other. "What do you mean?" "When I was really sick and couldn't stand the pain, I trained my soul to leave my body." Years later, I realized she was talking about astral projection, but that day, she didn't use that term. It wouldn't have mattered. I never heard of such a thing. I cocked my head and listened. She continued, "It was the only way I could get a break from the pain." My heart stabbed. I'd been so caught up with working full-time, raising my new baby, and helping my husband start his chiropractic clinic that I hadn't realized how sick she'd been. "I'm so sorry. One day when it was really bad, I wanted to die. I was ready to." Her eyes misted with a faraway look. My soul, I was outside my body, entered a meadow full of flowers, and I walked toward a glowing light in the distance. I knew it was heaven. I felt a hitch in my spirit as my skepticism surfaced. I'd been to Bible college and knew that neither meadows nor glowing lights appear in scriptural descriptions of heaven, but I held my tongue. I wanted to get there more than anything I've ever wanted before. From her odd expression, I could sense how powerful the experience was. But two people approached me. Somehow, I knew they were angels. They told me that I could enter heaven, but if I did, there'd be no one to help my family and friends when the tribulation came. "Tribulation?" She nodded. Then they showed me the future. I saw Jake and Seth as young men, screaming and running across the lawn with a bunch of other people right there. She turned around and knelt on the couch, nodding at the lakefront through the window. The sky was bright red with fiery explosions like a nuclear war. Everyone was screaming. Sparks were raining down on my boathouse and peony beds. I saw myself rushing people inside, sheltering them in our home, caring for the injured. She turned to gaze across the family room as if imagining the future infirmary before her. Seeing my boys as men was so weird. Now I know what they're going to look like. They were preteens, but you recognize them? They looked so much like Brad. Her expression grew wistful, but like themselves too. How old do you think they were? 20s probably, not more than 30. My heart skipped a beat. That meant the end of the world was only 15 years away. She made it sound so real. Taking a breath, I calmed myself. I knew dispensational eschatology. But believers won't go through the tribulation, so that can't be what you saw. You'll be raptured before that happens. She shrugged. I only know what the angels showed me. They didn't explain it, but I knew I couldn't leave Jake and Seth to face that without me. I agreed to come back. In my opinion, Ruthie had had a realistic dream, or a nightmare embedded in a dream, and nothing more. Still, if it strengthened her interest in spiritual things, it could do no harm. Since before she divorced Brad, who turned out to be an alcoholic, she had attended a Baptist church and taken her sons to Sunday school, so I thought she was doing okay spiritually. Ruthie seemed more at peace, but surprisingly, less concerned with Christianity. She stopped going to church. She lost interest in studying the Bible and didn't seem to care about obeying it. If her vision had truly been from angels, it should have made her act more Christian, not less, so I dismissed it. Besides, no one knew when the world would end. Jesus would appear as a thief in the night. God wouldn't give Ruthie special revelation that contradicted Scripture. Still, I never dared confront her about her vision or her faith. I wouldn't change her mind, and I didn't want to offend her. So that is kind of a story that well before Ruthie had her schizophrenic breakdown, she had a lot of little quirks. And she experimented with a lot of things.
Did you ever think, though, that was some of the very early signs of schizophrenia, or was it unrelated?
All I can say is, they say there's a fine line, between genius and mental illness or
madness.
Insanity.
Now, can you first just kind of give a very brief explanation of what exactly schizophrenia is? I think we all think of it as voices in the head. Is
Yeah.
that about it, or is there more
Yeah, I
to
mean,
it?
a lot of people have the idea of split personality, but that really isn't the case. That's kind of a separate condition. But
Hmm.
schizophrenia is just basically a psychosis where people have a lot of fantasy. It's kind of a fantasy world in their head that they can't tell the difference if that's real or false. And a lot of times, I think about a third is paranoid schizophrenia, where they think that people are out to get them. And they do, a lot of schizophrenics hear voices in their head
Okay, but
and
not
do,
all of them.
not all of them,
Okay.
right?
Okay, one thing, a friend of mine many years ago, I think she was working in a home or some setting where there were people with schizophrenia. She might have been doing home health care. And she noticed that an awful lot of the voices schizophrenics hear seem to be angelic or demonic. And she wondered, is it really mental illness or are some of them literally being attacked by demons? What is your thought on that?
I, when Ruthie first had her breakdown, like her real breakdown,
Hmm.
that was her first thing she said to me was, "I'm under demonic attack," because she
Hmm.
was hearing these voices and they were threatening her.
Hmm.
And so that's how I approached it, and it seemed logical to me because I believe in the spirit realm. And
Right.
I believe people can be oppressed and oppressed and
Possessed?
so that's kind of the route we went, but then as it furthered on, it seemed like it was more of a mental illness.
Mental
I don't
illness?
know. I don't know where the crossover is.
Right.
If there always is a crossover, or sometimes there's a crossover, or never.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
it's interesting. I've recently I've veered away from listening to politics on YouTube while I'm working with the animals, and I've been listening to a lot more apologetics lately. And I've come across one or two exorcists. I don't remember if it's the same one or two different ones. And they have talked about the process of exorcism and how they do first make people, when people come to them and say, I think I'm possessed or oppressed, can you help me? They do make them go first for a mental illness analysis. And they said most of them, it really is mental illness,
Really.
not spiritual. So, whoops. So that's kind of interesting too.
Yeah, it is.
And I don't know how they analyze that. I didn't get that far. But schizophrenia does tend to run in the family.
Hmm.
And I think that you had some fear that it would hit you too.
Yeah. Growing up, I knew my mom was schizophrenic and her brother was schizophrenic. And then we knew that she had two nieces, I believe. We didn't know them, but they were sisters, two sisters who were schizophrenic. So it did cross my mind. And I guess what helped me was somebody said, if you're thinking about it, then it's not happening to you. It's kind of like when it
Hmm.
happens, you think it's real and you don't question your own sanity.
Right,
As I thought, as long as I keep questioning my sanity, I'm in a good
right,
place.
right. No, we didn't really cover what Stolen by Schizophrenia is about, but it's about both your mother and your sister developing it. So the book is effectively two parts, right?
Right, right.
Okay.
Part one is about my mom, and this would happened way before I was born. When they were a young married couple, and they had three children, like a
Hmm.
4-year-old and a 2-year-old and an infant, and they were basically sharecropping, you would say, like farming, and my dad's uncle's or my mom's uncle's house. And the house, it was a really tragic, horrible incident, which is described in the book, how the house caught on fire. And my mom saved two of the children, but was unable to save the middle child, the toddler. And in the process of trying to save the children, Mom was just covered with very severe burns. And so then during her recovery and after she was released from the hospital, it was apparent that she was very psychotic. And so then she got treatment for that and was in and out of mental institutions for a couple of years. But when she was released, then she went on to have her own farm in Wisconsin from the insurance settlement from the fire. And she went on to have, what would it be, 7 more children, of which I was the very end. So I was the last one. So it's really remarkable if you think about it that someone with a severe mental illness like she had was able to function well enough back in those days to run a farm and to have all these kids. And yeah, and she was very loving. She has passed on to heaven now, but she was a very loving person and loved children. And I never heard her say an unkind thing about anyone except one time when she was in a very psychotic state. I was awful from her. But
how often do they think that trauma has any link to schizophrenia? Because your sister also had some trauma, but then so did you.
Yeah, well, they have found that, for instance, there's a correlation between childhood sexual abuse and schizophrenia. And both my sister Ruthie and I were sexually abused as children. And so that is something that I've thought about. And she was older at the time, and so the abuse, she remembered more of it. And I think it was a more severe abuse than I had. So I wonder what role that played in the schizophrenia too. Yeah, it is interesting to see, she had the genetic predisposition probably, and then also some life events that led there. And then I get into later when I was analyzing after her breakdown, and actually after her death, because she died pretty early from cancer, which should have been detected if she had been properly cared for. But,
right. That brings us to the question of, you saw the difference in treatment in the 60s and then in the early 2000s. Are those about the right time frame?
Yes, right.
And tell a little bit about the difference in how your mother's treatment was versus Ruthie's and how the law impacted that.
Right. So when I was just in first grade, my mom was institutionalized at a state mental hospital. And I visited her there a lot. And it was like a super creepy place. So I described that in the book. But really, and they didn't, this would have been early 64, I think. And they didn't have a lot of the newer medications that they have now and so on. But she went to classes, she had her hair done, she had her nails done, she socialized with people. And when she came out of there, she was in pretty good shape. And then later, when I was in 7th grade, she was institutionalized again because she had deteriorated, her condition had. And again, when she came out that time, she was very good in probably 3 months. And people would visit her, and she made friends, and she did crafts and all that stuff. But then when my sister had her breakdown, she was married to her 3rd husband, who was just a great guy, and they were so happy. But after about 2 years, she had this psychotic break. And I do talk about in the novel, or in the memoir, that she had started on Ritalin she believed she had ADHD. And she said that the Ritalin made her so much more efficient and so much clearer headed, and then, and then I read that, drugs in that class are kind of contraindicated when it comes to someone who's had a family history of schizophrenia. So I wondered.
Interesting. Okay.
So I wondered what role that medication might have had on causing the break that she had. But at any rate, she went to stay with her son, even though her husband wanted her to live with him. But she was kind of paranoid, and she believed things her son said against her husband. So there was this rift. So she went to stay with her son, and he didn't give her any normal cares whatsoever, or
Mhm.
see that she got any psychiatric help. And because of HIPAA, nobody could nobody could talk to the doctors and explain. And
Mhm.
to get somebody committed, theoretically, her son could have, but he would have had to say that she presented a danger to herself and others. And her son did not believe that was a true statement.
Mhm.
We all did. Her
Right.
siblings were like, yes, we don't know what she is going to do. And she's in a total fantasy world. And the only kind thing is to get her some care.
Right. Why is it that her son ended up with the legal authority to do that and her husband didn't have any legal authority to do that?
I guess because possession is 9/10 of the law. So
And
she
she moved in with him willingly.
moved in with him, and even though he wasn't her legal guardian, because she was there, the only way he felt he could have her removed would be to call, police or authorities and
Hmm.
have them forcibly take her from his home, which he was not willing to do. Where my dad was. They did come and take my mom forcibly when I was in
Right.
first.
Right.
Yeah.
I very much got the impression after reading your book that as much as we think we live in such a progressive society and things keep getting better, that really your mother came out better,
Yeah.
despite, supposedly we've improved laws to help people with mental
Mhm.
illness and all.
Well, there was the whole era of deinstitutionalization where they were
Right,
closing down these big mental hospitals because they were supposedly inhumane, and I thought they were
right,
creepy, but it helped my mom. So now
right,
people go into like group care home, but really many, many people who are living on the streets in homeless encampments, are probably schizophrenic or have other serious mental illness or drug addiction.
right.
And I think there was a case in Minneapolis. We have these encampments around here, and I think there was something like 114 or 120 people at an encampment, and the authorities came through and offered housing to everybody
Hmm.
there, and only like 14 said they wanted to go. So these people, they are mentally ill and they are not equipped to make good decisions for their own care. And that was the
Right,
case with my sister. And yet we were unable to intervene or interfere.
right. Well, one thing that jumped out to me as I read your book was it Seth who she was living with?
Right.
Okay, that she didn't have bed sheets. And
Mm-hmm.
he said every time I get her bed sheets, she cuts them up to do this, what was she,
Yeah.
crocheting or something like that
Crocheted
with.
with them. Right.
Right. And he doesn't want to go to the doctor. Am I supposed to physically pick her up?
Mm-hmm.
In a way, his hands were tied. And your answer would have been that he should have then committed her
My,
as a
nie-
way to
my
deal with
niece
that.
my niece and I went and talked to him and said, Seth, you've got to do this. It's the only kind
Hmm.
thing to do. It may feel like it's mean and not respecting her, but she needs help. And she's not
Hmm.
choosing to get help, and you have to force her to get the help that she needs. But he would not take that step.
And was his biggest reluctance that he thought it would be cruel to throw his mother out of his house?
That's kind of what he told us. And then his wife said something, made a comment like, my grandma was that way and she lived with us for a long time. So, and yet this was when Ruthie was in her 50s. And I was like, your grandma, don't talk
Right,
to me like she's 80 and has
right.
senile dementia. No, this is
Well,
something that could be treated.
I have to say though, when you're a young couple, everybody seems like they're in their 80s to you. And, I did wonder as I read that, especially that comment, how much did that play into it too? That to her, this was just normal to have your, that she saw her parents had their mother who was just old and in bad shape. And so to her, this was just kind of normal.
Just take it. Well, yes, fine. Okay, but they never. never took her to the doctor, never took her to the
Right.
dentist. You know, she lived in a basement bedroom. And
Yep.
then the final, which I won't give everything away, but at the end of the book, the way in which she died showed that, you know, she had been
She,
neglected. And if
right.
she had been in any kind of a group home like they have now, or a large mental institution, that never would have been allowed to happen. And she
Right.
probably would not have died the way she did and as early as she did.
Right. And the tragedy to me of this story was such a sharp contrast between your mother and your sister, and how our compassionate society really did absolutely nothing but hurt Ruthie.
Yes.
And it's not compassion, it's cruel. I mean, to put people out on the streets who need help and don't know that they need help.
Right.
And
Right.
as
And
you said,
we actually went through a guardianship hearing. We had a 2-day, we appeared before a judge for 2 days and had everyone, you know, all of our siblings come and testify. And the judge released her into her son's care for guardianship when he already
right?
had not taken her to a doctor or a dentist for 5 years.
Yeah,
And
that's
then
heartbreaking.
they put yeah, they said that part of the guardianship is that he had to take her. And then her husband tried to check up on her, and it's like, well, if you want to force him to do what the court order said, you have to file another lawsuit to force him to do what the
Mhm.
first lawsuit ordered.
Right. Well, you know, I found that out years ago, probably going back 35 years ago. My parents bought a house, and there was some damage to it after we moved in that hadn't been there when they signed the papers. So they got a judgment against the previous homeowner, and they very quickly found out judgments mean nothing. The homeowner didn't feel like paying, so they didn't. And so they went through that for nothing. So that is unfortunately true. You have a couple other projects going too.
Yes, yes. So I'm just so interested in New Harmony. And in my research for Destination Harmony, I was able to access some archival documents from Swarthmore. I guess it's Swarthmore University. And there's a tangential character in Destination Harmony. And I found about a 20-page journal that she had orally dictated and her husband recorded, and they had both been at New Harmony. And so she tells the tale of her life. Her name was Matilda Greentree, and she was one of the there was a double wedding ceremony at New Harmony. It was the first couples that got married under the Oneida system. And she was one of these two brides that got married that day. And her life story is just fascinating. And I feel like because it's buried in these archives, and who would have it and who would know about it? But it's like a Dickens novel. I'm like, there it is. It's all
Yes.
waiting for someone to write down. So I'm fictionalizing that, but staying very close to the actual life story of Matilda Greentree Price. And that's going to be a YA novel, which will be the first YA work that I've done. And I'm about a third of the way through, maybe a quarter of the way through that. But my target date, I want it to be released by April 2nd, I believe, was her anniversary. So this would be the 200th anniversary of her wedding in the upcoming
Neat.
April
Okay.
this year. So I'm hoping to have this novel out. And then I also did a nonfiction work about New Harmony as well, which I received a research grant for from the Working Women's Institute, which is in New Harmony, a historical library there. So I did a very lengthy, so the boatload of knowledge that you mentioned, these people who came down from Philadelphia to start the commune there in New Harmony, there were 15 women, girls and women on that boat. And so I've traced the legacy because, again, I was thinking, what happened to this utopian vision that people had when the utopia failed? What happened to that desire to make a better world? And so I tracked these 15 girls and women and their descendants. And it's very fascinating. I got way more than I expected to get, and how these women actually did, through themselves and their descendants, improve the country and the whole world. So that was fun. So that, after I get the YA novel out, then I'll go and it's all done already, my work and my writing for this nonfiction work, but just to polish it up and get it out there.
That's great. So to aspiring authors, what is your best advice? How did you go about improving your writing craft?
Good question. Yeah, I entered a lot of contests. And then a lot of times when you enter a contest, you can pay a little bit extra and get feedback. Maybe it's only feedback under 10 pages or whatever. But that was very helpful to me to get published authors' feedback on what I was doing. Went to a couple of conferences with the American Christian Fiction Writers ACFW group. I went to those and sat in. And actually on my memoir, this was years ago, like in 2018, I was trying to write it as like about a 5,000, maybe a 10,000 word piece max. And I paid to have a professional author critique it for me. And she said, you need to make it into a book.
Yeah, that story would not fit in 5,000 words. There's
so that was
too
good
much
advice.
there.
So I did that. And then, so I would just take the little bits of feedback that I got from these critiques and then just start doing that. And then, of course, as you know, our Night Writers group. So
Yes.
Weekly.
Yes.
Our group meets weekly, and we can bring a piece that we've worked on over the week to share, read aloud, and get real life critiques. And I think every single published book, I read the whole book, all 4 of them, at Night Writers, and also
Night Writers, yes.
my nonfiction book. So they've
that
heard
takes
a
a while. Right, because we can only read maybe 10 minutes, maybe 12 at a time. Yeah. So that's always my best advice to writers is find a good critique group. And I think that you had been in just one critique group before Night Writers, right? Yes. And that one didn't go so well?
No, because they were only meeting once a month. And then they were going to like exchange things through email, and you're supposed to read it before you come and then comment. And it's like people don't want that homework, So with our group, like you just come and you give feedback there and you don't have to do anything during the week except work on your own stuff, which is what you should be doing. But the other thing I love about the critique group is that now you have like a live audience. It's so cool because I would just, during the week, I'd be thinking, well, Jenny's going to ask this, and Lisa's going to say this, and Laura's going to say this. And so that's in my head.
Judd is going to say, Becky, I really like this a lot.
And would it be like an album title or something he would pick out?
Yes, he'd always fit in music. Yeah, I really miss our core group that we had and all of them. So, and also something else really good came out of Night Writers.
Yes, of course. So I had actually met Bob Miller, who is now my husband, at the first critique group. And we'd seen each other like 2 times there. And then I left that group. And then he contacted me and he said, "Where'd you go?" I'm like, "Is this guy stalking me?" And so I said, I went to another group in Maple Grove, and I didn't even tell him what it was. But somehow he tracked me down.
Tried to run away from him, and he tracked you down. Now you're married.
Yeah, and then even so, we sat across the table from each other for 2 years and never really got to know each other. And then, after COVID, he invited me to something, and I invited him to something, and then we just connected. It's like, whoa, we're soulmates. Who knew?
Yeah. And you should mention, well, it might be obvious because he's a Night Writers, but did you want to give a plug for his books too?
Yeah, absolutely. So he writes, would call it speculative or action fiction in a kind of a speculative world. And it's a 5-book series. He's working on the 5th one now, but it's called Chrysalis Chronology. It's available on Amazon. So really, really great. Very different kind of writing, but just the fact that we're both writers and we enjoy words and phrasing, and thinking about fictional worlds, that's really good bonding for us.
So I have a funny story related to his writing. As you know, we now live in Appalachia, or Appalachia, as they say here, and I have a hard time making myself say it like that. It sounds so strange to my ear. So there's a very interesting mix of terrible poverty right next door to some really beautiful houses. And so we live down the street from a couple of trailer parks. One of them I think is kind of okay. The other is, it's hard to believe people live in some of these. And at the bottom of our hill, there is this kind of ramshackle blue house. I mean, it's just stereotypical Appalachia. And there's this old lady who would always sit on the porch in her swing. She probably still does, wearing what you used to call a muumuu from the 1970s, you know, the old house coats that old ladies used to wear all day. And so we just call her muumuu. And we, of course, and my husband is a writer too, we started concocting this whole story about Moo. And every time we saw Moo, we'd be like, oh, I saw Moo. And we created this whole story about how she's really, you know, a secret agent. And she really has multiple levels beneath her house, and all these people are meeting. And one day I'm like, wait, multiple levels, like 6, 7 levels down beneath the house? This sounds familiar. Then I remembered, that's in Bob's story.
That's
All
right.
these levels. It just, I think Chris actually was the one who was like, yeah, she's got all these levels beneath her house. I've heard that somewhere before. So where can people find you online?
Well, I have an Amazon author page, so look up Rebecca May Hope. I also have an author site, which I need to update a little bit because I haven't put Stolen by Schizophrenia on there yet. But it has, it actually has some of my poetry, which I have published in your anthologies,
Right.
Laura, and it has some other little thing. There we go.
That's the first one.
Yeah.
There are 5 more, I think, 4 more.
So there's more about me, a few blogs and so on. So that is just RebeccaMayHope.com. And I have a Substack, which I also need to do more on, but I need to get this novel out first. So I think the link to the Substack is on my author site, RebeccaMayHope.com.
Yep. Okay, people can find me all kinds of places. You can go to lauravosica.com. That has links to everything I do online, which is probably way too much. You can find the publisher at gabrielshornpress.com. I did start a Substack, and I should mention Rebecca has a guest post up on my blog, and that is bluebellstrilogy.blogspot.com. And anybody who wants to see the fantastic farm animals we have, including the ram who trampled me, glenmerrillfarms.wordpress.com. And this is not Books and Brews, so I won't end with cheers. But thank you very much for being on.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.